The funeral director stopped me at the door. She said my grandmother's children had given explicit instructions. I was not family, I was not welcome, and if I tried to enter, they would call security. I stood there in the black dress I had bought specifically for this morning, holding a single white rose, while inside the chapel they were already reading the opening verses. What they did not know, what the funeral director did not know, was that the estate attorney was already watching from the back row. And the will my grandmother signed 6 months before she died had a clause that required my presence. Not requested, required. My name is Megan Cross. I had not spoken to my grandmother's side of the family in 11 years. Not since the divorce that split everything into sides, not since they chose my father and erased my mother from every photograph, every Christmas card, every obituary that followed. My grandmother was the only one who kept calling, the only one who sent birthday cards to an address she had to ask for every time. And when she died, her children decided that meant nothing. They planned the funeral without telling me. They told the funeral director I was estranged, difficult, not welcome. What they did not know was that my grandmother had rewritten her will 3 months before the cancer took her. And in that will, buried in the middle of legal language about asset distribution and residue clauses, she added one line that changed everything. A line that named me. A line that turned a funeral into a legal battlefield. And a line that forced an estate attorney to walk out of a service mid-prayer to bring me through that door. The question is not whether the family wanted me there. The question is what my grandmother knew that they did not. To understand why a will could force a funeral director to let someone through those doors, you have to understand my grandmother. Her name was Eleanor Vance. And for the first 15 years of my life, she was the only adult who ever made me feel like I was enough. My father's side of the family had money. Old money, the kind that doesn't talk about itself but shows up in the way people hold their silverware and which private schools they mention casually. My father, Richard Vance, was the oldest son, which meant he was the heir to everything. My mother came from a family that rented their homes and bought their cars used. The Vance family never said it out loud, but they treated her like a stain on the bloodline. I was born into that tension, a child who belonged to both worlds but was accepted by neither. My father's sisters, my aunts Patricia and Lorraine, made it clear from the beginning that I was a charity case they tolerated for appearances. They corrected my posture at dinner. They commented on my clothes. They asked me questions about school in a tone that suggested they already knew the answers would disappoint them. My father laughed it off. My mother cried in the car on the way home. And my grandmother watched everything from her chair at the head of the table, saying very little but nodding everything. Eleanor Vance was not like her daughters. She was sharp in a way that made people nervous. She had married into money but never let it soften her instincts. She grew up in a house with 3 brothers and a father who ran a hardware store, and she learned early that silence was a weapon when used correctly. She outlived 2 husbands, ran the family foundation for 23 years, and could read a room faster than most lawyers could read a contract. Her children were afraid of her. Not because she was cruel, but because she saw through them completely. She knew Patricia donated to charities for the photo opportunities. She knew Lorraine's marriage was held together by appearances and a joint checking account. She knew my father had never forgiven his own father for dying before handing over full control. And she knew exactly what they thought of me. When I was 12, my parents divorced. It was ugly, the kind of divorce that requires lawyers to sit in separate rooms and pass notes like children who cannot be trusted in the same lunch period. My mother accused my father of hiding assets. My father accused my mother of emotional instability. Both were right in different ways, but the Vance family closed ranks like a fist. They chose my father, publicly and permanently. My mother became a ghost at every family gathering. And I became a problem they did not know how to solve. My grandmother was the only one who reached out. She called me at my mother's apartment 3 weeks after the custody agreement was finalized. She said, "I know what they're saying about you. I want you to know I think it's nonsense." She invited me to lunch at a diner halfway between her house and my school, a neutral ground where nobody could accuse her of taking sides. We met there once a month for the next 2 years. She never badmouthed my father. She never pushed me to forgive anyone. She just showed up and asked how I was doing and actually listened to the answer. That may sound small, but when you are a teenager who has been treated like a contested piece of furniture, Being seen by someone you respect changes everything. Then I turned 17, and everything shifted. I was accepted to a university across the country. My father refused to contribute to tuition. He said I had chosen my mother's side and could live with the consequences. My grandmother offered to pay. Quietly, without drama, without making my father look bad publicly. I asked her why she would risk her relationship with her own son for me. She looked at me with an expression I did not fully understand until years later, a mix of sorrow and resolve, and said, "Because someone has to make sure you survive what they created." I did not know what that meant then. I thought she was talking about the divorce. I was wrong. She was talking about something much older, much deeper, and much more dangerous than a divorce. The family business did not survive the generation that inherited it. My father and his sisters fought over everything. The foundation, the real estate, the investment portfolios. They spent more on lawyers than they made in revenue. By the time I finished graduate school, the Vance family name had shifted from respected to notorious in the circles that tracked these things. Patricia and Lorraine refused to speak to each other unless a lawyer was present. My father remarried a woman 20 years younger who convinced him to restructure the family trust in ways that benefited her children from a previous marriage. The money was bleeding out through every crack. My grandmother watched all of this from her house on the hill, the one house that remained fully hers, the one asset none of them could touch. She had stopped inviting them to holidays. She had stopped returning calls from their lawyers. She spent her final years with a small circle of friends, a housekeeper she trusted completely, and a stack of legal documents she reviewed with an attorney named David Chen every quarter. David Chen was the managing partner of a boutique estate firm in the city. He was known for three things: absolute discretion, aggressive protection of his clients' intentions, and a willingness to enforce those intentions through litigation if necessary. My grandmother chose him carefully, and in her final months, she instructed him to draft a document that would become the single most contested piece of paper in the Vance family history. The cancer was diagnosed in February. Stage 4 pancreatic already spread to the liver. The doctors gave her 6 months. She lived 5. During those months, she did not call her children to reconcile. She did not ask for forgiveness or offer it. She called me. 3 times a week from her hospital bed, she asked about my work, my apartment, my dog, my life. She never mentioned the will. She never hinted at what she was planning. She just said, over and over, that she was proud of me and that she wanted me to remember something she had learned too late in her own life. Blood does not earn loyalty. Loyalty earns itself. She died on a Tuesday morning in early July. I was on a flight back to the city when it happened. I landed to a voicemail from David Chen asking me to call him as soon as possible. I returned the call from baggage claim, standing between a carousel and a wall of windows, watching rain hit the tarmac. He told me my grandmother had passed. Then he told me something else. He said, "Megan, I need you to know that your grandmother left specific instructions regarding her funeral service. And those instructions require your attendance. I cannot explain more until the will is read, but you need to be there." I asked him what would happen if her children tried to stop me. He paused for a moment. Then he said, "Then I will have to make sure they understand the legal consequences of defying a decedent's explicit written wishes." I did not know what that meant either, not yet, but I found out the moment I arrived at the funeral home. The parking lot was full of cars I recognized: Patricia's black SUV, Lorraine's sedan, my father's leased luxury car. I parked at the end of the row, walked up the path with the rose in my hand, and reached the door just as a woman in a black blazer stepped out to meet me. She introduced herself as the funeral director. Her name was Carol. She had been in this business for 20 years, and she had the practiced calm of someone who had seen grief do terrible things to reasonable people. But she was not calm when she looked at me. She looked nervous. She said, "I'm sorry, ma'am. The family has requested that you not attend the service." I asked her whose family. She said, "Patricia and Lorraine Vance and your father." I asked her if they had given a reason. She looked down at her clipboard, then back at me. She said, "They said you are not family. They said you are estranged. They said your presence would cause a disruption." I looked past her through the glass doors and saw the back of my grandmother's casket, draped in white flowers, surrounded by people who had spent years pretending I did not exist. I told Carol that my grandmother had explicitly requested my presence. Carol said she had not been informed of any such request. Then the double doors behind her swung open, and a man in a charcoal suit stepped out, holding a leather document case in one hand. He was tall, silver-haired, with the kind of face that looked like it had been carved from courtroom experience. He did not look at Carol. He looked at me. He said, "Megan, I'm David Chen. I need you to come inside." Carol started to protest. She said the family had given instructions. David Chen turned to her, very slowly, and said the words that would change everything. "I am the executor of Alina Vance's estate. I'm also the attorney who drafted her will. The will contains a clause that specifically names Megan as a required witness to the reading of the estate's final disposition. Under state probate code, her presence at this service is not a courtesy. It is a legal condition. If she is not admitted, the validity of the entire estate plan can be called into question." Carol's face went pale. She stepped aside. And I walked through those doors into a room full of people who had never wanted me there. They turned to look at me. Patricia's face went tight. Lorraine whispered something to her husband. My father stared at me like he was looking at a ghost. And at the front of the room, next to my grandmother's casket, there was a single empty chair. David Chen motioned toward it. He said, "That seat is yours." I walked past all of them. I sat down. And that is when I realized my grandmother had not just asked me to attend her funeral. She had set something in motion that none of us were ready for. The will reading was scheduled for the next morning, but the real battle had already begun the moment I crossed that threshold. The funeral director stepped aside. I walked past her, through the double doors, and into a room full of people who wished I had never been born. The air was thick with lilies and silence. Every eye turned toward me. Patricia's face was a mask of polished fury. Lorraine stared like I was a ghost risen from a grave she thought had been sealed years ago. And my father, Richard, looked at the ground. He could not even look at me. David Chen guided me to the front row. The empty chair was right next to my grandmother's casket. I sat down, and I felt, for the first time in 11 years, that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The minister spoke first, generic words about a life well lived. He had never met her. He was reading from notes provided by Patricia. But then David Chen stood up to deliver the eulogy. He walked to the podium and pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. He said, "Alina asked me to read this. She wrote it 3 days before she passed." He looked at the family. Then he read her words aloud. "Do not weep for me. I am finally free of the burden of watching the people I loved destroy themselves with greed." I heard Patricia gasp. David continued, "I leave my love to those who earned it, and to those who simply waited for me to die, I leave the silence they deserve." The room was frozen. Patricia's face went from pale to red. Lorraine was crying, but not the sad kind of crying. The angry kind, where tears are just fuel for rage. My father sat perfectly still, staring at the casket. And I understood then what my grandmother had done. She had used her own funeral to deliver a final verdict. Not in a courtroom, not in a lawyer's office, but in front of everyone they had tried to impress their entire lives. The friends, the business associates, the church members who had watched the Vance family perform respectability for decades. They all heard it. They all knew. After the burial, the family gathered at a restaurant my grandmother had hated. A French place with too much gold trim and waiters who judged you before you sat down. Patricia had chosen it intentionally, a final act of defiance against a woman who could no longer object. I walked in and the room went cold. Conversations stopped. My father approached me before I could reach the bar. His face was red in a way I had never seen before. He said, "What did you say to her?" I asked what he meant. He stepped closer. "What did you whisper in her ear to turn her against us? She was our mother. You were a ghost, and somehow you convinced her to humiliate us at her own funeral." I looked at him, really looked at him. He was smaller than I remembered, softer. The kind of soft that comes from decades of choosing comfort over courage. I said, "She was not turned against you. She was shown the truth. And the truth is you have not been a son to her for 20 years. You have been a vulture circling a dying animal, waiting for your share." Patricia slammed her hand on the table behind him. China rattled. She said, "You will not speak to us like that. You are nothing. You are a Vargas. You do not belong in this family." I smiled. I could not help it. I said, "No, Patricia, I am a cross, and I am the one your mother chose." Lorraine stood up. She was shaking. She said, "We will fight this. We will fight you. We will drag your name through every court in this state. We will make sure everyone knows what you did." I asked her what exactly I had done. She could not answer, because there was no answer. The only crime I had committed was existing after they had decided I should disappear. That night, I sat alone in my hotel room. The city lights blurred through the window. I felt hollow. Not victorious, not sad, just hollow. I had spent 11 years building a life far from this family, far from this pain. And in one day, my grandmother had pulled me back into the center of it. I did not know if I was grateful or angry. Then I checked my phone and saw a voicemail I had saved from months earlier. A message my grandmother had left me the week she was diagnosed. I pressed play. Her voice was thin, weaker than I remembered, but still sharp. She said, "Megan, I know they will try to break you. They will try to tear you down to protect their own egos. But you have something they do not. You have integrity, you have my blessing, and you have the law on your side. Do not waver, do not apologize, and do not ever let them make you feel small again." I played it 3 times. Then I slept better than I had in years. The next morning at 10 o'clock, we gathered in David Chen's conference room. The walls were lined with law books. The table was polished mahogany, so dark it reflected the ceiling lights like a black mirror. Patricia, Lorraine, and Richard sat on one side, their lawyer, Harold Sterling, beside them. He was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and the posture of someone who had spent his career looking down on people. I sat on the other side, alone. David Chen closed the heavy door. It clicked shut with the finality of a vault ceiling. He read the will aloud. It was short, unusually short for an estate of that size. "I, Eleanor Vance, being of sound mind and body, do hereby revoke all previous wills and codicils." He read the bequests. The household staff received generous severances. Maria, the housekeeper who had been with her for 18 years, received $50,000 and her pick of any furniture in the house. The local library received a donation of $200,000 in her husband's name. And then he reached the main distribution. He paused. "To my daughter, Patricia Vance, I leave the sum of $1. Patricia went white, not pale white. The color drained from her face so fast I thought she might faint. "To my daughter, Lorraine Vance, I leave the sum of $1. Lorraine let out a sound, a wounded noise that was half sob and half protest. "To my son, Richard Vance, I leave the sum of $1. Richard slammed his fist on the table. The sound echoed through the room. Harold Sterling started to speak, but David held up a hand. "To my granddaughter, Megan Cross," David continued, his voice steady, "I leave my home, the property at 12 Hawthorne Lane, all personal property contained therein, and the entirety of the Vance Family Trust. Megan is to serve as sole trustee. The income of the trust shall be paid to her for her lifetime. Upon her death, the remaining principal shall be distributed to a charitable organization of her choosing." Harold Sterling stood up so fast his chair scraped backward. "This is absurd. This is a textbook case of undue influence. A dying woman, isolated from her natural heirs, manipulated by a granddaughter who had been estranged for over a decade. We will file a challenge immediately. We will have this will set aside before the week is over." David Chen waited for him to finish. He was completely calm. He opened a folder and slid 3 documents across the table. "Before you do, Mr. Sterling, I direct your attention to Article 7, the no contest clause. It states, and I quote, 'If any beneficiary named herein challenges the validity of this will or any of its provisions, that beneficiary shall forfeit any bequest made to them in this instrument. Furthermore, said beneficiary shall be liable for all legal fees incurred by the estate in defending against such challenge.'" He let that sink in. "Given that the bequest to each of your clients is exactly $1, I suspect the court will not look kindly on a challenge driven purely by spite. And I assure you, the estate will not hesitate to recover every penny of legal fees from the challengers personally." The room went silent. Harold Sterling sat back down. Patricia was breathing heavily, her chest rising and falling like she was fighting off a panic attack. Lorraine was crying openly now, but there was no sympathy in the room. My father stared at the table. He looked defeated, broken, but then something shifted in his face. He looked up at me, and I saw it. The same cold calculation I had seen when he chose the family over me 11 years ago. He said, "She was manipulated. She was old. She was sick. She did not know what she was doing." David Chen replied, I have 3 separate psychiatric evaluations from the past 6 months, all confirming Alina Vance was of sound mind. I have a video recording of her reading this will aloud and affirming her intentions. And I have sworn affidavits from her primary physician, her hospice nurse, and her pastor, all confirming she was alert, oriented, and fully aware of her decisions until her final days. He stacked the documents neatly. The will is ironclad. I would advise your clients to accept it and move on. I sat there listening to them tear apart, and I realized what my grandmother had done. She had not just left me money. She had forced them to show the world exactly who they were. In a legal setting, under oath, they would have to admit they had failed her, or they could accept the dollar and slink away in shame. Either way, the truth was on the record. The truth was permanent. Richard stood up. He pointed at me. You did this. You poisoned her against us. You were always the favorite. Even as a child, it was sick. It was unnatural. I let him speak. I let them all expose themselves. And when they were done, I stood up. I said, I did not write this will. She did. She saw you for who you are. And she made her choice. Just like you made yours 11 years ago. The difference is she chose love. You chose greed. And now you have to live with that. I walked out of that office into the cold morning air. I thought it was over. I thought the legal document was the final move, the closing argument in a case that had been brewing for decades. But as I reached my car, I saw Patricia in the parking lot. She was on her phone, her back turned, her voice low but sharp. I stopped. I could not help it. I listened. She said, I do not care what it costs. I want everything. I want her investigated. I want every detail of her life dug up. I want her past pulled apart. I want her destroyed if that is what it takes. I got into my car. I looked in the rearview mirror at the law office. David Chen was standing at the window on the 3rd floor, watching. He knew they would not go quietly. The war was not over. It had just begun. And I realized my grandmother's plan was not finished. The trust, the house, the money, that was not the end game. That was the bait. She had dangled everything they wanted in front of them, knowing their greed would force them to show their true faces in public, in court, in front of everyone who had ever respected the Vance name. She did not just protect me. She gave me the weapon to finish what she started. The question was whether I had the strength to use it. The parking lot was empty by the time Patricia ended her call. She walked past my car without looking at me, got into her black SUV, and sat there for a full minute before the engine turned over. I watched her drive out onto the main road, and I knew she was not going home. She was going somewhere to begin what she had promised. I called David Chen from the driver's seat. He answered on the first ring. Patricia is going to fight, I said. She is already planning an investigation. David was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I expected that, but she is not the only one with resources, Megan. Your grandmother prepared for this. She left me a sealed envelope with instructions that I could only open if a will challenge was threatened. I asked what was in the envelope. He said, meet me at my office tomorrow morning at 8. I will explain everything. I barely slept. I kept replaying the reading, Patricia's face, Lorraine's sobbing, my father's cold stare, and I kept hearing Patricia's voice on the phone. I want her destroyed if that is what it takes. The next morning, I arrived at David's office before he did. I sat in the hallway on a leather bench, watching the building come to life. At exactly 8, he unlocked the door and gestured me in. The sealed envelope sat on his desk, unopened. He explained that the instructions were digital, stored with a third-party custodian, and required a password he had never seen. But the sealed envelope contained a personal note from Alina to me. I opened it. My grandmother's handwriting was shaky from the illness, but unmistakable. She wrote, Megan, if you are reading this, they have already tried to take what is yours. You know by now that I left you everything. But you do not yet know why. It was not because I loved you more than the others. It was because I trusted you more. In my nightstand, there is a false bottom. Beneath it, you will find a key to a safe deposit box at the First National Bank on Main Street. Inside the box is a folder. Inside that folder is the truth about how your father and his sisters destroyed the family foundation. I documented everything for 23 years. Every fraudulent transfer, every hidden account, every lie told to the board. Use it however you see fit. But know this, the only reason I never exposed them was because I was waiting for someone with the courage to finish what I started. I looked up at David. He was watching me carefully. He said, there is more. The safe deposit box also contains a second will, signed 2 weeks after the one we read yesterday. That will includes a specific provision that triggers if any of the other beneficiaries challenges the first will. It directs the executor to release the fraud documentation to the district attorney. I felt the floor tilt. My grandmother had not just protected me. She had set a trap so precise that if Patricia, Lorraine, or my father pushed too hard, they would hand themselves over to criminal prosecution. I drove straight to the bank. The safe deposit box was in a dim, quiet room with beige walls and a single table. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a thick manila folder, stuffed with bank statements, board meeting minutes, emails, and handwritten notes. I sat down and started reading, and the story that emerged was worse than I could have imagined. The Vance Family Foundation had been established by my great-grandfather in 1952. It was supposed to fund local arts programs, scholarships, and community health initiatives. By the time my father took over as chairman in the late 90s, the foundation had assets of roughly $12 million. Over the next 15 years, that number dropped to just under $2 million, even though the market had gone up dramatically. The money had been systematically drained. An art collection worth $400,000 had been sold privately, with no auction record, and the proceeds deposited into a shell company controlled by my father. Rental properties owned by the foundation had been leased below market rates to friends of Patricia's husband. Lorraine had approved grants to a nonprofit she ran, totaling $60,000 a year for 7 years, despite the fact that the nonprofit had filed no tax returns and had no measurable charitable activity. The documentation was meticulous. My grandmother had kept copies of bank statements from offshore accounts. She had recorded phone calls with board members and kept detailed logs of every conversation. She had even hired a private investigator in 2005 to confirm the transfers. She had the evidence to put all 3 of them in prison. I closed the folder and sat in the silence of that small room. I understood now why my grandmother had been so deliberate. She had not wanted revenge while she was alive because she feared it would tear the family apart before she was ready to let go. But she had prepared the weapon anyway, and she had given it to me. I called David and told him what I had found. He said, "The digital instructions I received from the custodian contain the same information. They also include a note from a liener that I am to forward to the district attorney if a challenge is filed. As of now, no formal challenge has been filed, but Patricia is scheduled to meet with a litigation attorney this afternoon in Chicago." I asked him what he recommended. He said, "That depends on what kind of person you want to be. You can wait for them to make the first move, or you can take control of the narrative." I decided to wait, not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to see exactly how far they would go. I wanted to give them enough rope to hang themselves with. And I got my answer 3 days later when a process server showed up at my apartment with a stack of papers an inch thick. Patricia, Lorraine, and Richard were suing me for undue influence, fraud, and conversion of estate assets. They were also seeking a temporary restraining order to prevent me from accessing the house on Hawthorne Lane or any of the trust assets until the case was resolved. David filed a response within 48 hours. He also filed a cross motion to enforce the no contest clause and to unseal the fraud documentation as evidence of the plaintiff's motive. The judge scheduled a hearing for the following week, and that is when the real war began. The media got wind of the story. It started with a business blog covering the collapse of a well-known family foundation. Then a local news station picked it up. Then the story went national. The headlines wrote themselves. Heir of Vance fortune buries family secrets in safe deposit box. Grandmother's revenge. Dying matriarch documented decades of fraud by her own children. Patricia tried to hold a press conference, but it backfired. She claimed I had manipulated a sick old woman into turning against her own blood. A reporter pulled up public court records showing that my grandmother had been the one who initially reported suspicious activity to the foundation's board in 2006. The question was, if she had been manipulated, why had she been the first to blow the whistle? The hearing was held in a packed courtroom. The judge, a woman in her late 60s with a face of granite, listened to both sides. Harold Sterling argued that a liener had been isolated and coerced. David Chen presented the psychiatric evaluations, the video recording, and then he submitted the folder. He said, "Your Honor, the plaintiffs claim their mother was not of sound mind, but the evidence shows she was well aware of her children's activities. In fact, she was so aware that she spent 2 decades documenting them. If anyone was manipulated, it was the decedent, by the very people now claiming to speak for her." The judge took the folder. She spent a full hour reading through it in her chambers. When she returned, she denied the request for a temporary restraining order. She also ordered that all assets be released to Megan Cross immediately, pending the outcome of the trial. And she added, "Given the evidence of potential criminal activity contained in these documents, I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for investigation." I watched Patricia's face collapse. Lorraine started crying again, but this time it was different. This time it was real fear. My father sat frozen, his hands gripping the table so hard his knuckles were white. They had lost. Not just the court, but the war my grandmother had prepared for years. That evening, I drove to the house on Hawthorne Lane for the first time since my grandmother died. The key turned easily in the lock. The door swung open and the smell hit me. Old wood, dried flowers, the faint trace of her perfume. Everything was exactly as she had left it. The Afghan draped over the armchair, the pile of books on the side table, the photograph of my mother and me at the beach, the only picture of us that had survived the divorce, sitting on the mantel in a silver frame. I realized then that my grandmother had not just left me a house. She had left me a sanctuary, a place where I could finally feel safe. But I also knew the fight was not over. Patricia would appeal. My father would try to negotiate. Lorraine would probably attempt to contact me privately, begging for mercy, claiming she had been swept along by her siblings. And I had to decide what to do with the folder. The district attorney's office had already called David. They wanted to meet. They wanted to know if I would cooperate with a criminal investigation that would almost certainly result in prison time for at least 2 of the 3. I walked into the living room and sat in my grandmother's chair. I looked at the phone on the side table, and I made a decision that would determine everything. I picked up the receiver and called David Chen. I said, "I want to meet with the district attorney, and I want to make sure that whatever happens, the truth comes out completely. No deals. No immunity for them unless they tell the full story. My grandmother waited 23 years for justice. I'm not going to let her wait any longer." The meeting with the district attorney happened in a windowless conference room on the 4th floor of the county courthouse. David Chen sat beside me. Across the table, 2 prosecutors and an investigator from the Financial Crimes Unit laid out what they had already found in the 3 days since Judge Morrison referred the case. They had subpoenaed bank records, foundation board minutes, and the emails my grandmother had preserved on a hidden server. They had interviewed 2 former board members who confirmed that Richard Vance had pressured them to approve transactions they did not fully understand. And they had discovered something my grandmother had not included in her folder, something she probably never knew. The shell company my father had used to funnel foundation money into his personal accounts also held a 1/3 interest in a commercial property development in Florida. That development was owned entirely by Patricia's husband through a separate entity, and the property had been purchased with funds traced directly back to the foundation. One of the prosecutors, a man named Kevin Tran, slid a diagram across the table. It looked like a spiderweb of corporate entities, linked by dotted lines and dollar amounts. He said, "This is not just fraud. This is conspiracy. Your father, his sisters, and their spouses coordinated this over 17 years. We have emails where Lorraine instructs her husband on what to say to the board. We have a recording of Patricia telling a real estate agent not to put anything in writing. And we have a check from Richard to a board member's nephew, a payment of $50,000 made 3 weeks before a key vote that allowed the shell company to acquire foundation property at below market value." I asked them what the penalties would be. Tran looked at his colleague, then back at me. He said, "Combined, your relatives are looking at federal charges that carry sentences of 10 to 20 years each. The fraud amount exceeds $1 million. That triggers enhanced sentencing guidelines. And because the foundation was registered as a charitable organization, there is an additional penalty for defrauding a nonprofit. If we prove the conspiracy, Richard Vance faces the longest sentence." He was the chairman. He signed the documents. He was the one who told the board that the art collection was sold at auction when it was actually sold to a private collector for half the appraised value, with the difference deposited into his personal account. I asked if there was any way to avoid prosecution. Kevin leaned back in his chair. He said, "Your grandmother's documentation is so thorough that we could secure indictments without your cooperation. But your testimony would seal the case. If you want to offer them a deal, if you want to give them a chance to plead to lesser charges and avoid trial, that is your right. But the evidence is overwhelming." And frankly, Ms. Cross, after reading your grandmother's notes, I believe she wanted full accountability. I thought about her letter. I was waiting for someone with the courage to finish what I started. She had not wanted mercy for them. She wanted truth. She wanted the record set straight. She wanted the world to know that the Vance family fortune we all grew up admiring was built on lies, and that the three people who claimed to be her heirs had spent 2 decades stealing from the very foundation she had built to honor her husband's memory. I told Kevin Tran I would cooperate fully. No deals, no immunity. I would testify under oath. I would answer every question, and I would not ask the court for leniency on their behalf. The decision would be up to the law. 3 weeks later, the indictments came down. Richard Vance was charged with 7 counts of wire fraud, 3 counts of money laundering, and 1 count of conspiracy to defraud a charitable organization. Patricia Vance was charged with 5 counts of wire fraud, 2 counts of money laundering, and 1 count of conspiracy. Lorraine Vance was charged with 4 counts of wire fraud, 1 count of money laundering, and 1 count of filing false tax returns related to the nonprofit she had used as a shell. Their husbands were charged with various accessory and conspiracy counts. In total, 11 individuals were indicted. The media coverage was relentless. Every news cycle brought a new detail. The photo of my father being led into the courthouse in handcuffs. The video of Patricia covering her face as she walked past reporters. Lorraine's tearful statement outside her attorney's office, claiming she had been misled by her siblings. The public turned against them completely. The same social circles that had once hosted them for dinner parties now refused to take their calls. The country club revoked their memberships. The local charity board that Patricia had chaired for 12 years issued a statement condemning her actions. I watched all of it from the house on Hawthorne Lane. I had moved in by then. The master bedroom still smelled like my grandmother's lavender sachets. I slept in her bed, not out of sentiment, but because it was the most comfortable room in the house, and because I felt closer to her there. I kept the folder on the nightstand. I read through it sometimes, late at night, marveling at the precision of her record-keeping, the patience of her revenge. The trial was scheduled for 18 months out. In the meantime, the court appointed a receiver to manage the remaining foundation assets. I was confirmed as sole trustee of the Vance Family Trust, but I had no interest in the money. I instructed David Chen to liquidate the trust assets and donate the proceeds to 3 organizations my grandmother had supported: the local public library, a women's shelter in the city, and a scholarship fund for first-generation college students. I kept the house on Hawthorne Lane and a small stipend for living expenses. The rest I gave away. My grandmother had earned that money with a lifetime of careful stewardship. It deserved to go where she had intended it to go. My father called me once from jail. I did not answer. He left a voicemail, his voice cracked and desperate, asking me to visit to forgive him, to tell the prosecutors to drop the charges. I deleted the message without listening to the whole thing. Lorraine sent a letter, handwritten, full of excuses, blaming Patricia and Richard, claiming she had been too weak to stand up to them. I read it, then filed it away in the same folder that held my grandmother's documentation. It belonged there, another piece of evidence in the long record of their failure. The surprising detail came 6 months later, when David Chen contacted me about an addendum to my grandmother's will that had been held in a separate filing with the probate court. It was dated 3 days before she died. It read, "In the event that my children are convicted of fraud or theft related to the Vance Family Foundation, I instruct that the $1 bequests to Patricia, Lorraine, and Richard be redistributed equally among their children. My grandchildren are not responsible for the sins of their parents. They deserve a chance to build something honorable." The clause applied to my cousins, Patricia and Lorraine's children, two teenagers I barely knew. They had no part in the conspiracy. They had been cut off from their parents after the indictments, living with their other grandparents, struggling to make sense of the family collapse. I contacted both of them through David. I invited them to the house. We sat in the living room, three strangers sharing a bloodline and a complicated grief. I told them about the addendum. I told them that the money, roughly $80,000 total after legal fees, would be split equally between them. They could use it for college, for a down payment on a home, for anything their grandmother would have approved of. The older one, Patricia's son, started crying. He said his mother had told him I was the enemy. He said he had believed her, and now he had no idea what to believe. I told him the truth does not care what we believe. It just waits for us to catch up. The case ended with a plea agreement 8 months before trial. Richard Vance pleaded guilty to 2 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of conspiracy. He was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. Patricia pleaded guilty to 1 count of wire fraud and 1 count of money laundering. She received 5 years. Lorraine pleaded to a reduced charge of filing false tax returns. She received 18 months. The others received probation and fines. The judge, in her sentencing statement, said, "This family spent decades hiding behind a reputation they did not earn. Today, the reputation is gone. What remains is the truth. And the truth is, Alina Vance trusted the right person. Her granddaughter had the courage to let that trust lead where it needed to go." I did not feel victorious. I felt something quieter, a sense that a long chapter had finally closed. I spent the following year rebuilding my life, repairing the relationships with my cousins, and learning to live in a house that no longer felt haunted by the past. I planted a garden in the backyard where my grandmother's roses used to grow. I hung a new photograph on the mantle, a picture of her and me at that diner, the one where we met for lunch during the divorce. She was laughing in that photo. She rarely laughed, but that day, I had told her a terrible joke about a cat and a lawyer, and she had laughed so hard the waitress came over to see what was happening. I think about that laugh a lot. It reminds me that even people who carry heavy burdens can still find lightness. My grandmother carried the weight of her children's betrayal for 23 years. She carried it so I would not have to carry it forever. And in the end, she gave me the only gift that mattered. She gave me permission to let it go. The house on Hawthorne Lane is quiet now. I sit in her chair, the one by the window where she used to read. I look out at the street, at the neighbors going about their ordinary lives, unaware that on this block, in this house, a war was fought and won with nothing but paper and patience, and a woman who refused to let the truth be buried with her. I did not write this story. I was just the one she trusted to finish it. People often ask me if I feel closure. I tell them closure is not the right word. Closure suggests something ends cleanly, like a door clicking shut. What I feel is more like the quiet that follows a long storm. Not resolution, just the absence of noise. My grandmother spent 23 years documenting the slow destruction of everything she built. She did it not because she wanted revenge, but because she understood something that most people never learn. Silence is not the same as peace. Letting people hurt you without consequence does not make you noble. It makes you an accomplice to your own diminishment. I think about the funeral director sometimes. The woman who stood at the door and told me I was not family. She was doing her job. She had been given a list of names by people who looked like they belonged. And she believed them because they sounded reasonable and I sounded like a complication. That is how abuse survives. Not through malice alone, but through the willingness of ordinary people to accept the official story without question. My grandmother knew that. She wrote her will in plain language so that no one could misinterpret it. She named me specifically so that no one could claim she had been confused. She left a trail of evidence so clear that even a stranger could follow it to the truth. The question that stays with me is not whether I did the right thing. It is whether I would have had the courage to do it without her preparation. She gave me the weapon, yes, but she also gave me the permission to use it. And that is a gift I cannot repay except by passing it forward. If there is something you are carrying that you have been told to bury, if there is a truth you have been taught to call bitterness, ask yourself one question. Would the person who hurt you be willing to face the same scrutiny you endure every time you tell your story? If the answer is no, then you already know what silence costs. My grandmother used to say that family is not a word you inherit. It is a sentence you finish writing every day. I did not choose the family I was born into, but I chose the family I built. I chose the house on Hawthorne Lane, the garden in the backyard, the cousins who showed up for dinner even when they did not know what to say. I chose to let the truth stand on its own weight. And that is the only victory that matters. If this story resonated with you, consider subscribing. I will be sharing more of what I have learned about surviving the people who were supposed to protect us. The door is open. All you have to do is walk through it.